Muted.
Good afternoon. Welcome back. We are going to continue our webinar series of the Balanced Reading Diet. And this time we're going to be looking at phonics and phonemic awareness. And I'll tell you, when I went through my training with becoming a certified reading specialist, all these words were very confusing to me. So if you feel that way, you are not alone. You're in good company. But we are going to look at them and hopefully make some sense out of what all those words mean and just in a real practical way how to address them in your instructional time with your class. Our goals today are, of course, to define all those terms: phonics, phonological awareness, and phonemic awareness. We want to look at some instructional strategies that can really support your children's achievement in this area, and look at some potential weekly schedules, what this might look like in the classroom throughout a week as you plan for your classroom time. And then how do we collect evidence on it? That's another thing I think that sometimes trips us up, is we're not sure about how to know in a real definitive way where our children are in the process. And so sometimes we might overdo it, sometimes we might not do it enough. So talk a little bit about that as well. As always, remember, if you do have questions, you can type them in the chat box. I'll be happy to stop periodically and answer those. But also remember that the webinar is recorded and it will be posted on the tree. We have, like everyone else here, our IT guy is swamped. So these haven't been getting posted as quickly as I had hoped, but I do want you to know, if you'll just email me, I can send you the link to OneDrive where you can access it even before it's posted there. So let's just go back. We've looked at this graphic every single time when we talk about the balanced literacy diet and what this looks like. And again, just as a reminder, you can see that each of those areas, the reading, the writing, listening, speaking, and language, that they're equal in their size, but when you actually look at the little boxes, they have when you look at the reading one, just has a lot more stuff in it, a lot more of those clusters and objectives in the reading one, that's exactly the reason that we spent so much time on this, because those foundational reading skills really have to be in place in order for all those other things to happen. And as you can see from that graphic, and I know we've talked about this every time, is that synchrony of literacy development. So as you look back at our graphic, you'll see that in the center it shows that everything is interdependent on the other. So what they're learning in their reading skills, it's going to show up in their writing, it's going to show up in their speaking and in their use of the language. And that's what Donald Baer refers to as the synchrony of literacy development. It's really difficult to tease those out and try to teach them in isolation, although you do have to do that. I mean, some of those skills is just like learning to play a sport. If you have a child that wants to learn how to play basketball, they have to spend a lot of time just learning to dribble or learning to walk while they're dribbling, learning to shoot the ball. So this is a very similar situation, and some of those things do just have to be taught in isolation and, taught with some repeated practice and skill development. But you also, I think it's very wise to understand how they're connected and how you can begin to see as a child progresses in one area that you should anticipate seeing changes in those other areas as well. So let's just start by looking at some of these terms, because I know they sound similar, and they can get confusing, and I don't know that there's even a need for you to know them to be able to spout off the definitions, but for our purposes today, just so so it makes sense to you what we're talking about. Phonological awareness is the ability to distinguish sounds from one another. So that happens, that if you can think of it in layers, that really is the first layer. That happens even before phonemic awareness, because children have to be able to hear the difference in sounds before they can even start making those connections between, oh, this letter represents that sound that I'm hearing. And this is the reason, really, that any time that I was doing any type of word study with my children, and we were starting a new feature or a new type of word, I always had them do picture sorts first, even up through, you know, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, simply because I wanted them not to just depend on what they saw, you know, looking at the patterns in words, but I needed to know that they were able to auditorily discriminate in those sounds and determine, you know, what it was they were hearing before they started trying to put together and make some generalizations about how these words were built. So again, just some really basic definitions that phonological awareness is just the ability to hear the sounds. A phoneme, when you talk about that, phonemes and phonemic awareness, a phoneme is just the smallest unit of sound. So, for instance, you can see the example on the screen. In cat, there are actually 3 phonemes, the k, a, t. So you hear all 3 of the letters, but that's not necessarily true with other words. If you look at the word phone, you hear phone. You hear 3 different phonemes or unit of sound, but there's not a one-to-one correspondence with those letters. So hearing those smallest units, there's no inherent meaning in the units. It's really just about being able to discern all the sounds that you're hearing as you're producing a word. And so the phonemic awareness is the ability to hear those sounds and then to start to manipulate those sounds. So I've looked at k, a, t, and I know that says cat, but now with phonemic awareness, I can change that k to a b and make the word bat. So I can begin to manipulate the sounds to create new words and word families. And then phonics, of course, is just the relationship between the sounds and the symbols or the letters. And your phonics instruction, of course, just focuses on teaching those relationships. Now, I know I've mentioned this book every time, and I'm just telling you, when I was in the classroom, this really became my Bible. We're going to talk about word study and just how to help your children study words and how words are constructed. So it's not necessary that you have this word. I just like, anytime that I've had a resource that has been very beneficial to me, I you know, try to highlight that as a potential resource for you as well. And so in Words Their Way and in Word Study, Words Their Way, the book just has some differentiated spelling procedures that help students at their development appropriate spelling stage. Now, this is one thing I think is really interesting, and I see this happen a lot. I even saw this a little bit in the standards, that children progress in their spelling in a developmental manner, almost like they do, you know, with their ability, like we were talking about, to bounce a ball or to skip, or there's really a process that they go through. And sometimes in classrooms, I don't always see us honor that development. So we'll have one spelling list, and sometimes I've seen spelling lists which are just a list of vocabulary words that come from a book, from a story that the class is reading for the week or the session. Sometimes it's just like a whole bunch of short vowel sound words or a whole bunch of long vowel sound words without any real understanding of how children learn to spell developmentally and how they learn to hear those sounds. And so we want to talk about how that happens for a child and how you can best honor that process as you prepare your instruction and your planning for your classroom. So again, just looking at the purpose of what word study, it really is to help your children develop some knowledge about spelling patterns, and just come to some generalizations rather than just rules, because you know as well as I do that many, many times in the English language there are things that just do not make sense. We tell them this is the way you spell it, and then they'll come on one of those sight words that we, have them memorize, and it doesn't fit the pattern at all. So it's more about helping them just make some generalizations about spelling rather than just memorizing a bunch of rules. And it also increases their knowledge of words, so it really builds vocabulary as they are learning how to spell and the meaning of individual words. So let's take a look at how our children do develop. Now, as you look in the parentheses at the ages that are listed here, please know this really is a generalization. And I'm sure that as we look through the descriptions of each of these levels, you might be teaching a third grade class and going, oh, no, I've still got emergent spellers in third grade. So just know that they are generalizations, but it's just to kind of give you a guide to typically when children are in each of these developmental stages. Now, an emergent speller is pre-K to, first grade, usually end of first grade, sometimes second. And this is where there's just random marks, things that may not even really look like letters, sometimes use letters and numbers interchangeably. So there's no real pattern to how they're doing it. They're just trying to make sense of all the stuff that they're seeing on the paper. With letter name spellers, though, that can come anytime from kindergarten to third, and they start spelling those words with what they hear first, and children begin to hear the initial and the final consonant first. You'll see them, they'll spell with just two letters. Hot, they'll spell with an H and a T, and they won't always hear that medial vowel. Within word spellers, and again, a generalization, can start from first grade really up into fourth. Sometimes I know I've taught fifth, and I've still had children working within word. And this is where they start hearing what's in the middle of those consonants. And so they'll start with learning to put in those short vowels, and then those long vowel and vowel combinations, and then those blends and digraphs. So they'll start being able to discriminate those. Syllables and affixes, oh my, you may, as we go through this, say, hey, I'm still in that one. Because some of these, I am not a good speller. And sometimes when I read these definitions, I'm like, I think I'm still there. So this one's supposed to be, from third to eighth grade, where they start looking at words that have multiple syllables and whether to double the consonant or using suffixes and what those generalizations are. And then the derivational relation spellers really is ongoing. Sometimes we, even as adults, when we look at new content, or if we're, studying a different topic, we'll begin to see the morphology, or the where words come from. So based on their Latin or Greek roots, and then the addition of prefixes and suffixes, we start to be able to see how words are derived based on the meaning of that root word. So let's take a look at this picture. You can see here at the beginning, this of course would be the emergent stage. You see some things that might be the beginnings of letters, but mainly it's just scribbling, and not even really a clear designation between drawing and scribbling. Whereas in the next one, you can see some very definitive marks that are starting to look like letters. So you can tell that this child's actually progressed further along, still in the emergent stage, but it looks like probably late emergent stage. And then as you look down here in the bottom, with Cameron's picture, you can see how this child is starting to hear sounds and be able to identify what letters correspond to those sounds. So trying to spell jasmine, and you can see the letters that Cameron has attributed to what he or she, I'm not sure if it's a girl or a boy, but what they're hearing in those letters. And then as you take a look at this last one, well, you can really start to see that this child is not only hearing those initial and final consonants, but they have a good understanding of those medial vowels too. So this child's probably late letter name, maybe starting into a within word. And this again, you can just see some typical what you would see from an emergent speller at this stage. And here they're not, they're just, nothing they're doing is conventional. Like I said, it can be very random. What's really important about this stage, and parents often make this mistake too, is they'll say, oh, well, my son can't write yet. Or, yeah, my daughter, she's not able to write yet. That's really not true. There's the very early stages of it, of course, but it's really important that we encourage what they're doing, because that's how they're learning. And, in their mind, as they're putting those symbols down, they can tell you what they mean. They can, they can read it back to you, even though it's not spelled conventionally. So it's really important when you're in those early grades, if you teach pre-K or kindergarten or even first, that you are very considerate of your students, and talk about their writing, even when it's not what we would typically think of as writing, but just encouraging that process, and that, gosh, yeah, you are doing it. This is exactly what good readers and writers do. It's what you're doing, using those marks to tell your story and get your ideas on paper. And we've used the diet each time, and you can see that this would correspond to our emergent or pre-reader diet as well. And it's exactly what you would anticipate. And that's what I mean by how everything's interconnected. You'll begin to see, as they get a better grasp of matching those letters to sounds, that's how they get their concept of print and being able to, concept of word. And when they're able to determine that those spaces in between groups of letters, that constitutes a word. And so all that happens at the same time, and in that synchrony like we were talking about. Now in this next stage, in the letter name stage, again, this is when they are doing those beginning and ending consonants, and then they'll start being able to represent most of their short vowel patterns. And you may have seen some of these examples that you have here, spelling bed, B-A-D, and not being able to hear those blends and digraphs. And this would be very typical of a beginning reader. And you can see that they would sort words by their beginning sounds, by rhyming families, and then those short and long vowel sounds. And then in the within word pattern stage, that's when they start not only being able to discern the short vowels, but discern the short vowels from the long vowels. So they move from that consonant vowel consonant pattern into those long vowel patterns. And that would be typical of a late beginning reader, but it also, you know, could represent a transitional or an instructional reader diet. And then again, the syllables and affixes. And this is where they're looking at the multisyllabic words and how to correctly write those, whether I'm doubling the syllables or what to do when I add those prefixes and suffixes. This would go along with the transitional or the instructional reader diet. And then the final one, the derivational relations. So again, being able not only to look at spelling patterns, but now we're starting to discern meaning from words based on the base word, the root word, and what we've added to that word, what we've built around it to make new words. And this again would be our transitional or instructional reader diet. So let's talk a little bit, because I showed you right back at the beginning a picture of a child sorting those pictures. So why do we do sorts? Well, if you're familiar at all with Dr. Bob Marzano's work, when he's done meta-analyses about what kinds of strategies teachers use that have the greatest effect on student achievement, one of the top ones that he talks about is being able to determine similarities and differences. So it really takes a high level of skill for a child to be able to, you know, say words, say what a picture is, and determine how it's like the pattern or how it's not like the pattern. So it demonstrates what your students know, and then it starts helping them make those generalizations as they move from sorting pictures into sorting words and seeing what kinds of patterns that they're seeing in words. I loved this. It says, Mark, this is a quote from Mark Twain. It said, if teaching were telling, we'd all be so smart we could hardly stand ourselves. And that really is I think the premise behind using sort is giving children real hands-on involvement in their learning, having them make those decisions rather than us just saying, okay, that word goes here and this word goes here, or spell this word, but helping children learn to take ownership of what they're learning. And so when you think about word study, it really is the essential activity. Think about sorting. And there's lots of different kinds of sorts, but the reasons that we do that is, like I said, one, because it's hands-on. So the children are getting to participate in the experience. but it involves a lot of talking. And you know, we've talked about this every time in one of these webinars, that as we all do, have several children, usually a large percentage of our children come from low-income backgrounds, may not have had a lot of access to text, may not have had a lot of rich experiences at home with engaging in conversations and experiences. Talking is so critical for them to be able to do, as they are thinking and trying to process and rationalize, you know, why they're making the decisions that they're making. Giving them an opportunity not only to talk to us as their teachers, but to talk to each other. Like, why did you put that there? Well, here's how I sorted it. You know, I put these here because of this. And boy, you can really start to see, again, going back to that synchrony of development, how that supports their listening and speaking, as well as it's supporting their reading skills, foundational skills. And then we already talked about the compare and contrast and categorizing and just putting their thinking into action. And speaking of that categorizing, don't limit this just to word study. This is a really great strategy to use in any of your content areas. You know, giving them different concepts and in you know, science or social studies or math, and allowing them to sort those concepts by characteristics is again just a high skill strategy that you can use, you know, across the learning content. And typically we talk about, when we talk about sorting, we talk about two different types. An open sort, really what that means is we're letting the children determine that. And usually the way I would do it is when I would give them pictures at the beginning when we're introducing a new type of word or a new feature of word, I would just give them those pictures, and my very first thing would be, you know, I take a look at all these pictures and I want you to sort them into categories, however you want to do it, you know, as long as you can tell me why you've done it. And, you know, sometimes they would do things that are living or not living, things that were, I could find outside or inside, or things that they liked or things they were afraid of. And so they would make that determination how they wanted to. And it really was just based on their own generalizations that they came up with. But we would use these same words for multiple things, words or pictures. And so we could have open sorts, but then we would move towards closed sorts. And the closed sorts were based on how I defined the sort was going to be. So I might put two pictures as headings and say, now I want you to sort the words that begin like football. You know, if you hear the same sound that you hear at the beginning of football, put the words here. If you hear if this word has the same sound as you hear at the beginning of toothbrush, you know, put them here. So I'm determining the criteria and they're sorting them that way. And here are some ways, you know, just different types of sorts, like we were talking about with the pictures or sounds, determining those relationships, sorting by patterns. And what I would do is when we would look at those long vowel patterns, for example, they would hear that long vowel sound, you know, in all their words, but then when they would see them written, they would start to sort them according to the pattern that they saw in the letters. So that was another way that we did a closed sort. And then, of course, meaning, you know, how to sort by what the words mean. And then we did that by the picture sorts, word sorts, blind sorts, and we're going to look at what all these mean, buddy sorts, writing sorts, and speed sorts. And here you can see what each of them mean. We've talked about the closed sort. We've talked about the open sort. A blind sort, just that the children are not getting any kinds of visual clues. So they just have a piece of paper and pencil, and I or a buddy's calling out the word to them, and they are sorting them, write them in the correct category. So they don't have anything to support them other than what they're hearing and being able to discriminate the words that way. Concept sorts, of course, like we talked about with other content areas that you can use. And then a speed sort, this really helps your children move towards automaticity and being able to discriminate their words quickly. So it can be, a closed sort, an open sort, or a blind sort, but it's just trying to do it more quickly over time as they gain experience and understanding of the word features. Now here's some principles of word study when you think about word study, is looking for what students use but confuse. And you'll see this a lot, like when they first start identifying that there's a sound in between those two consonants. Sometimes they will they'll use those short vowel sounds, but they'll confuse them. So they might confuse the short A and the short O, or the short O and the short U. And so you start looking for what students are using, so they're starting to use those medial vowel sounds, but what they're confusing. And which leads to the second one, a step back is a step forward. You want to start where students can have some success. So you know that they're already aware of that beginning and ending sound with their consonants. So it's a good thing to start at the end of that developmental stage and then move them into that within word pattern. Make sure that you use words that you can read, especially if you are using picture words. Before I would have them do anything, I would have them go through and read the pictures. Just tell me what the pictures were. Because sometimes they would, like it would be a picture of a man and they would call it a dad or a daddy. When you come up on those words, just throw them out. Don't use ones that your children are having a hard time remembering what they are. So if they don't know them, it's not a good one for them to use. And then you always want to compare words that do follow the pattern with words that don't follow the pattern. Don't be afraid to share those exceptions to the rules. As a matter of fact, this is the perfect place to share those exceptions, because it really draws their attention to, gosh, I would have thought this word would have had this sound. And just looking at those long vowel patterns with made, afraid, and they would look at that and think that should say stayed. and you'll see them read it that way too, as they're starting to make those generalizations. But this is a really good time to use those sight words that don't make sense. A lot of those words don't follow the patterns, which is why they become known as sight words, because they don't really make sense around the generalizations that we can make about how words are spelled. And then sorting them by sounds and by sight. And it's really important when you start this that you start with the obvious contrast. You don't want to start out with, if you're doing long vowel patterns, for example, you don't want to start out with all the different long vowel patterns. You want to start with what those obvious ones are. So the short, cap, C-A-P, versus cape, C-A-P-E. So something that's very obvious for them to start to look at, what are the differences and what's happening because of that difference I see in the spelling. And we already talked about not hiding the exceptions. We would call that, we would even make that column on our paper when we would sort. We would call them the oddballs, or anything that just, they didn't make sense to us. They did not follow the pattern like we thought they should. You do want to avoid rules, again, just going back to what we said about there really aren't a lot of hard and fast rules when it comes to spelling. So you're just trying to help your children start to make some generalizations around concepts, around the way words are spelled, and applying those to their writing and to their reading. Work towards automaticity. You really want to move towards them being able to make those discriminations quickly. And always, always, always return it to meaningful text. So one of the ways I would try to do that is by doing word hunts. Now, I will tell you, when I taught third grade, my team and I made a decision that we were not going to give homework. And we determined, that we were going to work really hard while they were there, but when the children got out of school, that our encouragement to families was play games with them, talk to them, take them to be on a ball team, let them go take gymnastics. Enjoy your children. We'll make sure they learn what they need to learn while we're here, but we wanted them to enjoy them when they were home. Well, now, you may not believe this, but parents got really upset about that. There were parents who were like, oh my gosh, wait, no, they need homework. So for the parents who wanted it, we did try to provide some activities. It wasn't anything that we graded, or, children did not get any kind of consequence. It was just, here, if you want some extra practice at home, here are some things you can do. And one of them was with word hunts. And so we would encourage them, if you're reading a bedtime story to your child, help them look for words that follow the patterns that we're studying, or have them go through the titles of the newspaper and see if they can find words that are following the same patterns. Now, I just had a question. Will we get a copy of this PowerPoint? Absolutely. Anything that I have belongs to you. So anytime that you see something that I share, or that I have, just let me know. I'm more than happy to share with you. And then this just gives you some ideas about what that might look like. So you can see at the top that they are sorting by those blends, but they're sorting the pictures first. And then you can see down in the bottom right-hand corner that they're looking at short vowel versus long vowel and long vowel patterns. So let's take a look at what this might look like. Now, and please remember, anything that we talk about is just some ways of you to think through how you might do this in your own classroom. Doesn't mean I'm saying this is what you ought to be doing on Monday. These are just some ways that I know teachers have used it, and that I've used it in my own classroom. So on Monday, all I did was give them out their sort, and I would give them out pictures, and then I would give them out the printed words, and I would let them cut them out, and we kept ours in a baggie. So I'd let them cut them out. I would have them read the words and pictures to me to make sure they, again, they were words that they could read. And that was pretty much all we did the first day. If we had extra time, I might tell them to, go ahead and sort these in a way that makes sense to you, and give them an opportunity to do an open sort. On Tuesday, then, if you've already sorted them on Monday, you can resort the words. But I'm generally on Tuesday, that was when I did a teaching day. And so we did it as a class. We started sorting the words whole group and talking about why, what were we seeing? What were the generalizations that we were starting to make? And then I would give the children time in their word study notebook, which was just, a regular spiral-bound notebook. I would allow them to pick 6 words and draw and label them. And on Wednesday, doing, again, the very same thing, sorting words, but this time I would let them do it with a partner. So, each of you sort and then check each other's work. Discuss any that you're having difficulty with. Where are you struggling? On Thursday, we generally did some sort of a game. We would do one called Sparkle, where they would have to go through and we would get in a circle, and each child would say one letter of a word, and then after we'd spelled the entire word, the last one would say sparkle, and then the next one would have to sit down. And so we would just keep going until everybody was sitting down and we'd practiced all of their words. Or we did speed sorts, where we would get in groups of 3 or 4 with our backs to each other. The children would bend down to the floor, turn all the cards face down and mix them up, and then they would stand and move, to the right, move one place to the right. And when I would say go, they would bend back down and quickly sort the words as quickly as they could and just stand up when they got finished. So, it was just, yay, you were first. And so there weren't any prizes, but again, just working towards that automaticity. And then on Friday, we would generally do some sort of an assessment. Now, I will tell you too, and we'll talk about this a little bit at the end when we talk about some considerations. I didn't always feel like by Friday they were ready. So I didn't have a hard and fast, Friday's spelling test per se. Sometimes if it was a new feature, and maybe when we first started into those long vowel patterns, sometimes it took a while for it to click for them, what generalizations they were seeing. So, sometimes this would be a 2-week process, and I wouldn't worry about that. I wouldn't feel like every Friday, I have to have that spelling test or some sort of an assessment, because I was assessing all through the week as I was watching them sort with their buddies and do speed sorts and sort their words in their word study notebooks. So just know you get lots of evidence by doing word study, doing this type of process. So what would an assessment look like? Well, a lot of ways. Sometimes I would just have them, actually sort the words into categories, like you see in that first one in the upper left-hand corner, sorting them according to the word family. Sometimes I would have a blank paper. They would have to write their guide words at the top, and then as I called out the word, this would be a blind sort, as I called it out, they would have to write it in the correct column. So there are a lot of different ways that you can do it to assess, but boy, the biggest, the biggest piece of evidence you can find is when you start seeing it in their writing, because that's when you know they've made the transfer. They're not just making those generalizations and trying to figure it out. It's become a part of their understanding about how words work. And so this would be an example of taking a look at their writing. So you can see in that first one, they know the letter I, but you don't see any concept of word. There's a lot of evidence you get from this around their standards, So there's no concept of word. You do know that they have the letter I. It does look like they're getting some sounds from listening to that sentence, but look at the difference when you look at that bottom one. Obviously a concept of word, hearing those beginning and ending consonants, and oh my gosh, look at that multi-syllable word, housekeeping, how many sounds that that child was able to discern in there. So gosh, you can tell just even by looking at these two examples how much further along one is in the developmental process. Now on this one, these are just some sites that have good information about word study, some PowerPoint presentations. The one site is a companion for Words Their Way, so there are some training videos on it, tutorials, some actual sorts on there. If you do have the book, or ever choose to get the book comes with a 6-month online access. All the word sorts are up there, so you really don't have to design anything on your own. But again, you don't have to have the book. It's pretty easy to, decide words with the short vowel sounds. It's pretty easy to put those together, and I know there are a lot of sites. If you just go to Google and type in, short A words or word sorts, you will get lots and lots of websites. Don't try to recreate it. It's already out there. I would never try to go through and do that on my own. I have much better uses of my time that I want to get the most out of my time. And so if stuff's already created, I don't try to redo it on my own. And then Spelling City is just an online website where you can do a lot of those things online. Even if you chose to do some sort of an assessment, you can do that on there as well. Okay, let's think through some considerations, because I know when when I've gone and presented on this before, a lot of people's initial reaction is, this looks like a lot of work. And I will tell you, when you first start with this, with word study, it can be time consuming. This is a really good place if you have an aide or you have parent volunteers, or just anybody that helps you in your school. This is a great place to use them, because some of it is just like making copies or cutting out the word sorts, or making new word sorts with colored pictures, however it is that you like it to be done. So the initial setup can be time consuming, but that's again a place to call for help, to ask for people to come and help you. But you are going to have to think about, how are you going to fit that into your day? Where does that logically fit in your instructional time? And especially as you move on down, how are you going to handle multiple groups? If you've got children at different developmental levels, how are you going to handle that? Because it takes some really good classroom management skills to be able to do that. And I'll tell you, when I first started, I first started with only one group, because I wanted to know that I was doing it correctly, that I had a good understanding of what we were doing. So I started with one group. I kind of tried to make sure that I was attending to everybody's need. I know I didn't, because I needed to have a good grasp of this to begin with. So I know I didn't meet everybody's need, but I got a good handle on what I was doing. And then I only went to 2 groups, and so I had one group that was in this stage, one group that was in this stage, and we would just flip-flop. So I would work with half of them, the other half, I would have them practicing something. And every year when I started out my year, it really was the first 2 or 3 weeks I solidly spent on classroom management. This is how we move into groups. This is how we change groups. This is how we line up. This is how we, move down the hall. So a large portion of the beginning of my year was spent getting them accustomed to our classroom schedule and routines in a way that made me be able to manage our time well. So that's something you'll need to consider. By the end, I had them really accustomed to the way we did things, that I could do 3, 4 groups at a time pretty easily, and they could rotate through stations, and so I got much better at it as I went along. And thinking about how you're going to collect evidence, what happens if you don't think they're ready, or if you give them that sort on Friday and they don't pass, they still don't do well. What are you going to do? How are you going to handle that? And that next to last one, it really is a good idea, if this is new information for you, that you preview that sort before you introduce it to them. Make sure that you understand what the basis of the sort is and what the generalizations are that you're trying to help your children come to. And then just know that, like we said at the beginning, there is a lot of prep that you do to begin with. But after my first year, I already had everything made, and I had little baggies with each one of the sorts in that I used on my pocket chart. All I had to do then was either make a copy for them to cut out, or else I would give them a blank template and let them write them in and cut them out. All right, I'm going to stop right here because I've had some comments and questions. Let me see what it says. Oh my, I have a lot. Yay, this is exciting. Okay, we talked about the PowerPoint. Yes, you certainly can have it. So am I understanding that we should have different diets going on in the classroom dependent on ability level, homogeneous groups? You may be getting to that now. I'm at the kindergarten level. Let me tell you, my philosophy always is very similar to my philosophy in my home, that if mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. So I say the very same thing in that classroom. You have to do what you are comfortable with. And I really think you almost do more harm than good when you go into trying to do multiple groups without good preparation and having your children trained in what your schedule and your routines are and your expectations. So like I said, for me, I eased into it. At first, I was just trying to learn word study. So I only did one group. I did it with everybody. And once I felt like I had a good handle on it, then I split them into 2 groups. And once I felt like I was doing a really good job with that, then I was able to split them into other groups. And so it really is based on what you feel like you can handle and do well. I think you're much better doing a really good job at one group than doing a poor job at having 3 groups. So just extend yourself some grace. That's always my encouragement is, we're all in process. We're all learning. We can all move forward. So wherever you are in the process, just know, I'm going to do the best job I can with where I am now, and I'm also going to be intentional about getting better at this, about moving forward. So I know that wasn't a real definitive answer to your question, but hopefully it's helpful. Do you have a source for ready-made pictures and word or sound cards? I don't personally. I will tell you, if you get the book, like I said, they do have all those resources with online access that you have for 6 months once you log in. But again, if you go to Google and just type in, you know, word sorts and images, I promise you, you will get whatever kind of sort you need. So Google's my answer to everything. The Words Their Way book can be bought on Amazon. That is correct. TPT has many lists also. I don't know what TPT is, though. A technology component helps so much with the differentiation. That's written as a question. I'm not sure I understand. So if April, if you want to give me a little more information about that. Let's see. Helen says, kids enjoy doing picture sorts and word sorts on the smartboard. Oh, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I know a lot of classrooms have those. They sure do, and what a great way not to have to make those copies. You know, to give them that ability on the smartboard. Makes a great small group activity as well if you're, you know, if you have multiple groups and they're moving through stations. And it says, and teachers can keep an eye on them as they're sorting. Students have to explain to the teacher or class how they sorted, and there's many good sorting pictures in Gallery. Gosh, thanks for sharing that. That's a great resource. Oh, Teachers Pay Teacher Site is TPT. Thanks, Denise. I appreciate that. Oh, okay. April says, let me go back to it. A technology component helps a lot with differentiation. You're exactly right. If you have that ability in your classroom where you can make one of your groups or stations like that smartboard with technology, or the website Spelling City that we just talked about, yeah, you're exactly right. That does make a good resource. Okay, I don't have any more questions. If you do have them, though, feel free to keep typing them in. Also know that we have additional webinars coming up next month, and if you got the listserv today twice, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I hate sending them out multiple times, but I sent the first one wrong. I had put it in as, I think I had put it in as comprehension for this time, but that's actually next month, so I'd gotten them out of order. But these are our future webinars. In March, we're going to be talking about comprehension, and I think we're going to be doing it in a way you may not have ever thought about. Much different than just, you know, sequencing and main idea and those components of comprehension that we generally think of. In April, we're going to be looking at writing, and then in May, vocabulary. All right, Dawn had a question. Would you give grades to each group based on the list that they were sorting? Yes, I did, and I will give you a little caution. You'll need to determine whatever your county policies are around grading, all that. But I even, you know, when I was in those younger grades, like if we were doing beginning sounds, and I would give them a word, and they got the beginning, but they didn't get the rest of the word correct, I still gave them credit for it, because all I was looking for was that beginning sound. So there are a lot of different ways you can do this. I know some teachers would give them credit for the beginning sound and then give them another point if they got the rest of the word right. And that's, you know, whatever works for you. But yeah, I did give them grades based on the list that they were sorting, because I knew that was what their developmental level was. Good question. Thanks for asking that. And then finally, the tree that we talk about in each one. Let me see if it will take us here. If you go to the department's website and let me go home. Well, maybe it won't go. But if you go to the department's website, there's a search bar, and if you'll just type in TREE, it will take you right to this page. And then up here under Early Learning, P to 5, you can see that it's separated out by grade levels. And when you go to your grade level, you'll see all of your resources. And down here is where we've been posting the webinars, right down here at the bottom under the professional learning. Like I told you, they haven't gotten posted as quickly as I had hoped. So if you're looking for one and you don't see it here, just send me an email. I'll be happy to share the link to OneDrive for you. And then last thing, here's my contact information at any time. If you have questions or you need some resources, just need some encouragement about, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, you know, what do you think? Or do you have any recommendations? Feel free to contact me. That's why I'm here, and I'm more than happy to help you in any way that I can. I know when you get in the classroom, and especially when you've got all those contents and all those preparations to do, that it can get so overwhelming. So again, anything that I can do to help, please feel free to let me know. I always end by just telling you how much I appreciate the work that you're doing and how you're supporting children and families all across the state. What you do makes a difference, and I know you don't hear that enough, but I do just want you to know how much I appreciate the investment that you're making. And if there are no other questions, we will end. Thank you so much for joining me today. Have a great